in this land, there are natural things that can make people sick. The land can defend itself.
You live on the res, not much goes on here, and then boom, it hits your town, and then you're on the news.
I'm not too sure what, the real numbers are, when it comes to death, but there has been a lot. There's been a lot of deaths.
Every single one of these we came through our facility.
The battle in your mind and what happens with COVID is, I won't say verbatim, is similar to veterans in war. They may have not been out there in a battlefield constantly scared for their life, but in their mind, it was the same thing.
I'm Morgana. I'm a humanitarian, photographer, and filmmaker. And this is my husband, Yaku. He's a helicopter pilot. In 2014, we were living in Liberia, West Africa, when the world's largest Ebola outbreak erupted. I helped PCI Media share Ebola survivor stories through radio, TV, and social media, reaching nearly 10 million people. It helped curb the spread of the virus by driving changes in attitudes and behaviors. I saw the impact the storytelling had on communities in the middle of the outbreak. So when COVID-19 started spreading where we lived in 2020, we began documenting and sharing stories of COVID-19 survivors in New York to spread awareness about the disease. But we decided that wasn't enough. We wanted to show how COVID-19 is impacting people across America. So we moved out of our New York apartment and we moved into a 19-foot trailer so we could document COVID-19 survivors in all 50 states in America.
Today we are driving into the heart of the largest Native American reservation in the US, the Navajo Nation. It now spans over 17 million acres of rugged terrain with limited roads and infrastructure across Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico, where over 170,000 people live. New Mexico is a hot zone right now as cases continue to rise. The reservation's Department of Health reissued a stay-at-home order recently, so they are currently under a 9 p.m. curfew and most stores close by 3 p.m. We are planning to meet with 3 COVID-19 survivors and a funeral home director to find out just how COVID-19 has impacted people on the reservation. From the Spanish flu to the hantavirus, the Navajo has been devastated by previous outbreaks. For residents like Zephyrin, a traditional weaver and silversmith, it brought back haunting memories.
I don't know the technical details of hantavirus, but it is a respiratory ailment. It had a lot of similarities to what we see with COVID. It affects primarily the lungs. So you will start with cold-like symptoms, you'll have flu-like symptoms by noontime, and you could be dead by 7 p.m. I remember my uncle saying all the young people are going home with headaches and they're never coming back to work. It was really scary the first year out here because people stigmatized the hantavirus. They called it the Navajo flu. You go into town and all of a sudden you see signs, Navajo's order in the back, and the menu was in the alleyway where you had to order. So when this shutdown first started, I was like, dang, it's bringing up all these old memories of when I was like 5 and 6 of how much stigma and hatred and bigotry was happening because of people think this disease is tied to the color of your skin. In this land, there are natural things that can make people sick. That if you go out there and just take any which way and disrespectful to the land can defend itself.
Because of their previous experience, Zephyrin and others feared the worst when they heard about COVID on the news.
I always monitor world news, especially when it comes to flu because of my dad. So at the end of December, I was already telling everyone, this is probably going to be like any other flu. It's going to get out and it's going to be around and it's going to be our problem sooner than later. The early mortality rates came up and I ran those numbers to the Navajo Nation and it said that 30,000 of us will require some sort of medical care, at least oxygen, and the mortality for us was going to be about 3,000. So around late February is when I really started telling my closest friends and everyone that they should probably start getting ready in case things get bad. You know, in most cases they were saying you're an alarmist.
The COVID-19 pandemic reached the Navajo Nation in March 2020 and spread rapidly due to multi-generational homes, close families, transmission across the reservation border, pre-existing conditions, and inadequate health services. We didn't know it when we arrived, but we were headed right into ground zero of the outbreak in the Navajo Nation, Chimboteau, where a local survivor invited us to stay on his land. He and his half-sister told us their stories and how they nearly lost their moms. But first, they made us a traditional Navajo stew.
This looks amazing. Jay, take the first bite. It's good.
The sickness started from our community. I'm going to say right about March 12th or 13th. We came together just as, normally that we would do, enjoying food and family time. And not knowing that one of the family members already exposed to COVID. 2 days after, the family member called me up and she says, I'm not feeling too well. There's something that's happening with me. I didn't know much about it because this whole thing was new to us. I didn't even know if I was sick or not until maybe the 4th or the 5th day after our family gathering. And that night, things just changed for the worst.
And then 2 weeks after that, that's when the Chimboteau Christian Church had their super spreader event. We had 12 positives in 1 week. It was 2 weeks before the media and the Navajo Nation government would admit something was going on there, and that even at the same time, the healthcare systems here seemed to be oblivious that they needed to start pre-planning. We knew something was going on, and then by the end of March, it was very well known that this is here, and it's spreading and it's going to be bad.
They put our community on a hard lockdown. So every entrance coming into our community, they were blocked off. Just something that you would never imagine to happen within our community. It was really scary.
You live on the res, not much goes on here. And then boom, it hits your town and then you're on the news and you're like, whoa, this is just so unreal.
The first week when this whole virus came through, we were hearing of people, community members dying every day, left and right.
I got a call from my roommate and they said the test results are positive. I need you to, get tested. Just to be sure. I went to get tested and it was an older doctor and he was wearing a face shield but he wasn't wearing a mask. He had this really like condescending look when I was explaining my symptoms, like I was lying about it. The nurse came out with a pulse oximeter and we did a lap, and it dipped to about 89%. He says, okay, I'm gonna talk to the doctor because that's not supposed to happen. He came back down and says, well, we're gonna treat you as clinically positive, but we can't tell you're positive until we get the test back, and take quarantine measures of precaution. But here's your albuterol, because I still think this is allergies and you're just having nasal symptoms. That's when I started making plans like, well, what do I do if I require hospitalization? Who's going to take care of my dad? How am I going to feed myself?
Sunday morning, I woke up feeling awful. I started getting bad body aches. I started running fevers. And then it just seemed like everything started to go downhill from there. I'm a diabetic, so that's what scared me. I couldn't keep anything down. I was exhausted, living in fear for those couple of days. I think it was like a nightmare. You know, you're just like, am I gonna die tonight? You know, what if I die in my sleep? That was all that went through my mind was, you know, is this really it?
You know, with our community, we were like counting up to about 150. I mean, that's a lot for a small community, you know, like ours here. Most of them survived. A number of people did pass away from COVID. There has been a lot. There's been a lot of deaths.
At one point, Navajo Nation had a higher per capita death rate than any state in America. Michael and his team provided funeral services for many of those who passed.
A lot of these people, good friends of mine, like Rudy over there. We shared the love for the Raiders. A friend of mine, like Daryl over there. He's my good friend's brother. He's, his brother was my college roommate. Known him forever, ever since we were little boys. So I knew Daryl too, since he was a little boy. Every single one of these we came to our facility. It's quite a bit.
And at one point I did have a temporary storage unit here. It was a 56-foot semi-trailer that we had here that we can help with our storage. During flu seasons, I don't see these numbers. I don't need a temporary storage unit during flu season. So it's not the flu. I can tell you our stats from the past 2 years were around 270 per year. And right now I looked at our count, it's 517, and which is, you know, almost double what we were doing before, so.
While Michael and his team worked tirelessly to prepare and bury the surge of bodies, under-resourced and overextended healthcare facilities struggled to treat the flood of patients.
I got there to the IHS and they couldn't help me. I felt like I was suffocating, but it seemed like they ignored everything. They just didn't want to help you. And the only thing that they would ever say that I always remember is, come back when you get worse.
All that time, you know, I was sick and I didn't know I was exposing my sickness. And then my mom came down with the sickness just days right after. I've made at least 5 trips back over to the emergency room. It seems like it was every other day I was going back. Finally, on our 5th visit back over there, I demanded to be hospitalized. I've never seen so many people in the emergency room here at our local hospital. We got there early in the morning, but we didn't get hospitalized until later that evening. So we waited about 10 to 12 hours before they even found a bed for the both of us. And throughout that night, you know, I heard people just coughing, crying. You know, people are in pain, and it was just shattering. It came to the point to where if anything had changed that night, they were going to go ahead and place my mom on ventilator. They had maxed her out on her oxygen. And I recall her, you know, just telling us, like, you know what, if anything should happen, you know, just know that I love my kids. I love my grandkids. And she's like, you know what, there's a number of family members that went into the hospital that never came back. And she says, I feel, you know what, that's probably what's going to happen to me.
And my main concern were my kids. And I actually started to write who I wanted my kids to be with. As soon as I got to the bottom, I sat and I cried. And then I thought to myself, you're not going anywhere because you didn't bring these kids into this world to be left alone. You're not going anywhere. You're going to make it home and you're going to take care of your kids because you're all they have. And then finally, a doctor came in and she said she was going to have me shipped out to Flagstaff. And I said, and if you have a bed for me in Flagstaff, can you guys take my mom? Take my mom and I'll go home. Because I'm not going to leave without her. She started to cry and then they took her. I think that's where it kind of felt a little better because I was not going to leave without her.
Many critically ill patients had to be transferred to hospitals off the reservation in Arizona and New Mexico because the healthcare facilities on the reservation were not equipped to treat them.
The doctor called us and that she was ready to be released, and that was Mother's Day weekend. So all the doctors and the nurses and the medical assistant and everybody else, you know, they were there. One of them opened the door and they lined up. And everybody's just like, you know, clapping for her. And she's coming down, you know, with her wheelchair. And my sister and I, you know, were just sitting there in the vehicle and, you know, just very emotional. But it was actually a very happy feeling at the same time, you know, to see your mom coming, you know, being released from the hospital.
The Navajo are very family orientated, and they live in big families. Big numbers come together and have ceremonies and celebrations and just eat together. And they're incredibly hospitable and welcoming. Makes sense why it spread so much. It's their culture. It's similar to Liberia with Ebola. It was their culture that caused the spread of the virus, washing the bodies, and that's when the body was the most contagious.
But it was also the hospitality of Liberians, because when a family member is sick, they will take them into their home and they will take care of them.
Yeah.
And then the entire house will be good.
Yeah, and it's sad because here you have these cultures that are so close to their family, and that like spending time together, being hospitable and welcoming people, and just being loving their neighbor. And that causes the virus to spread even more. And to prevent the virus from spreading, you have to stop those cultures and break that up. And that's a crazy thing about this virus, is it's destroying that. It's destroying that culture.
To date, over 52,000 people have contracted COVID in the Navajo Nation. Of those, over 50,000 have survived. But surviving isn't the end of the story for everyone.
The worst for me came later. As my fever finally broke that Saturday, I'd started the long road up to recovery after that. And then just day by day, just taking a few minutes to spin some yarn, just, you know, doing this motion was enough to make me winded and not be able to do anything. And if I spent too long outside or pushed myself, I would have 4 hours where I feel like I'm back at my fever and you're stuck in bed. And a lot of people were trying to assign blame of this virus on divine intervention, like, you know, this is our punishment for not following natural law, and that everyone who got sick deserved it somehow. That was the biggest stake through my heart, that, you know, people were looking at me like he must be a bad person because he got sick. And I lost some friends during that. It was just me, my yarn, and my tablet, and my binge watching was my therapy through that. And then having to take breaks from binge watching because you would forget what you watched before. So you constantly kind of have to go back and re-watch stuff. I tried to weave back to some of the stuff that I was working on before I got sick. I would do something and then get lost. By the time that I needed to remember where I was at, I'd lose where I'd been. I took apart the entire weaving and I retaught myself how to do the pattern in the correct way and had to reweave that weaving. The frustration for that whole month was just learning how to reweave again. You can track my recovery in this weaving. The sequence of when I'm supposed to repeat and redo things. You can tell when I'm having a mental hiccup. These points where I lost it just a little bit, where I don't know where I'm at. I didn't realize that I had COVID woven into this first piece. The battle in your mind and what happens with COVID is, I won't say verbatim, is similar to veterans in war. They may have not been out there in a battlefield constantly scared for their life, but in their mind, it was the same thing. This is like the third time that I've had to, you know, tell the COVID story, but every time it just feels like, you know, like there's a madman with a gun randomly shooting people. He looked you in the eye and was ready to hit the trigger, and for some reason or another, just continued on. It's hard to fight feelings that you're not worthy, considering some of the people that have passed. But then you are, because you can't live as a human being, you know, thinking that.
What an incredible guy. Thank you to him for allowing us in his home and welcoming us and showing us everything.
The cloth that he was weaving while he was sick, you can clearly see in the weaves and in the patterns certain areas where he had bad days and like he had forgetful days. Seeing that in the patterns and in the different days, that was amazing. It just shows you how COVID's affected his brain.
In a way, with each and every person you talk to, there's a little bit of that you experience with them emotionally, because you're there. You're listening to their stories. You hear them. It's our last day here. I just realized that. It kind of makes me sad. I don't want to leave. I want to stay a little longer.
Thank goodness for the Jeep's GPS, because otherwise we have no idea where we're going, since we don't have reception right now.
Yeah, I love Jeep.
On our last night, we decided to go to a primitive campground on a beach, but since we wrapped filming late, it was pitch dark by the time we arrived.
We haven't had reception on either of our phones since 11 a.m. this morning.
Yeah.
So we're going into all of this blind. But this
Deep
one's...
sand on beach, travel at no risk. See, I just got no idea.
Just go for the RVs up there.
I just don't want to get stuck in the sand.
You have a 4-wheel drive. Should maybe fine.
Up in your window.
Okay.
We're stuck.
What do you mean we're stuck?
We are stuck. We are digging ourselves in.
Okay.
This is where we're camping. I don't know how we're gonna get out of here. I'm gonna try something.
Okay.
You are incredible. Here we are, Louie.
Okay.
That's it. Oh shoot, I just drove with the brakes on. And it still went through. Gee, you are incredibly amazing. Oh my goodness, my heart. I don't like getting stuck.
The next day, we woke up to this, and after enjoying our view, we packed up our things and hit the road again. You could see the people of the Navajo Nation were committed to protecting each other to prevent more deaths. Navajo Nation was one of the hardest hit communities in the United States when the outbreak first started. But because of their strong sense of commitment to the community, they responded quickly and drastically with stricter regulation for a longer period of time than almost all other governing bodies in the United States. Because of that, they had a significantly lower mortality rate than Zephyrin originally anticipated. We didn't want to leave, but it was time to meet the next survivors.
There's something about that virus that affects people's autonomic nervous systems.
I woke up in the middle of the night with a heart rate of 180 beats per minute. Just shot out of bed, barely made it to my sister's bedroom because I almost passed out. And I just looked at her and I was like, you need to call 911.
And it was scary, you know, when your sister is literally in your arms on the ground telling you that she doesn't think she's gonna make it to the hospital in the next 10 minutes. It's terrifying. I think she ended up going to the ER 5 times in California in the span of like 10 days.
I'm seeing for the first time since the pandemic, people saying they got dysautonomia from having COVID.
There's a huge increase in referrals to our clinic after pandemic, and it's not just Hopkins.
Hey, thank you for watching. If you've liked this video, please like, share, comment, and subscribe, as this helps the YouTube algorithm share this video with others.
Right now, we're planning to release 12 episodes, 1 a week for 12 weeks. But we have a lot more content than that. And if we can get additional funding, then we can keep going and we can share more stories.
So if you've liked this video, please consider becoming a Patreon member, as this helps us share stories with others. You can follow the link in the description below.
Also, over the next couple days, we'll release extended interviews with the people in this video. You can check them out on our YouTube channel or on the webpage dedicated to this episode, which will have those extended interviews in addition to additional resources related to the topic that we covered. We'll put the link to that in the description below as well.
Thank you again for watching, and please tune in next Thursday for the next episode.